UK-based band Enter Shikari are back with a brand new album called The Spark. And this album is a bit of a departure sonically from the albums that they've released in the past. It's a bit of an evolution if you've been following the band, especially if you listen to their last album, 2015's The Minesweep. It represents a bit of a slowdown for the band. It's not quite as heavy, it's not quite as in your face as they've previously done, or anything as chaotic as they previously have released. The album starts off with a song called The Sights, which is definitely where you kind of get a sense of where they're going with this album in particular. It's got a sense of optimism. It's got these twinkly electronics. They're not bass heavy in any way. The vocals are mostly smooth. There's a little bit of shouting in there, but not anything that we've heard from in the past. And it's definitely got a much catchier bridge leading up to a fairly interesting and catchy chorus that they've done here. The song single that they released, the first single off this album, called Live Outside, is a bit more traditional Enter Shikari, but it's definitely subdued and lighter than they've done. Everything feels generally upbeat, but there's this kind of sense of melancholy underneath the song in the lyrics as well as in the presentation of it, and you really get a sense that it's conveyed a lot within the music video that they released for it. The song Rabble Rouser, which is the second track that they released and the second music video they released, is even more what I would say what we've come to expect from the band. It's got a heavy bass line. It's really heavy on the electronic work on here. The electronic work itself is very bass heavy and kind of influenced by drum and bass and dubstep, and it's more chaotic and kind of cut up than what we've heard, but it's still got that catchiness and that same kind of striking that most of Enter Shikari really has. When you listen to other songs off this album, like Airfield or Shinrin Yoku, you get a sense of where they're going and changing with this. They're lighter songs. They're not quite as oppressive as songs that they've released, or like I said, they're not as chaotic or off the wall. There's no heavy breakdowns in those. There's no screaming. There's a little bit of shouting here and there, but not really. There's just not as much going on. They're not as busy of songs as we've really kind of expected. It's a departure from what they've done, but in a lot of ways it's also an evolution. We did start to hear some of that on The Minesweep, and even going back further to A Flash Flood of Color, you kind of heard some songs on there that kind of previewed this sound. So it's not so much drastic, I would call it. It's not like they suddenly went off in a completely different direction with their sound. It's just something to get used to and a little bit of change. And I think this is an album that is probably going to be a grower. This is something I don't think a lot of people are going to like right off the bat, especially fans of the band. I think they're probably going to be a little bit taken aback with this position that they're taking, but I think it's something that once you kind of get into and give a few listens, that you'll find it still is the same band that you've always been listening to. They've just kind of changed things up a little bit, and I think honestly for the better. I wasn't huge into some of those songs off of The Minesweep where they kind of played with this style, but I think that they've done it well enough on this album that it's ends up actually being very strong here. Now, there have been some complaints as far as the political nature of these tracks and of this album and the band, and honestly I don't get where that's coming from, because Enter Shikari have really always never hidden their political views in their songs. I mean, they've always been out there. They've always been straightforward. They're usually, layered in metaphors, and they are still here. If you really are surprised by any of that, you really probably haven't been paying attention too much to this band. They've always tackled things like climate change, the economy, and everything. And obviously their views are centered within the UK because that's where they're from, but a lot of what they talk about is done in a way that it becomes universal. It doesn't feel like they're specifically mentioning anything in the UK. I mean, they have at times, but even when they do, it still feels like it's something that applies universally and can be definitely seen by more than just people who are in the UK. And I think that's something that they've always done well, and I think that they've done it here. And honestly, if anything, I think there's a little bit less of that on here than there is in their previous albums. I think the particular Flash Flood of Color was pretty heavy-handed with some of those things. Not in a negative way, but just, I feel like if that's something that really bothers you about this album, that album must have really pissed you off there. But I don't understand why that's something to be upset. I mean, they're musicians, they're going to talk about things, and they are going to talk about social issues and things like that. And again, there's nothing here that feels directly like it's tackling something. It just kind of feels like it applies outside of its time and outside of its origin, of country of origin, anything like that. So I don't understand where those complaints are coming from, that this is too in your face with the politics or anything like that. But overall, they have definitely crafted a tight-knit album with the Spark. I think that the direction that they're taking, I mean, some people are definitely going to lament the fact that it's not as heavy as they've done in the past, or again, not as chaotic. There's still some songs in there that will keep you entertained, but if that's the only reason you're into the band, you're probably going to be disappointed with this. I just really think that people should kind of give this a chance and give it a few listens at least. I think that this is an album that once you kind of start to appreciate where they're going with it, what they've done, and what they're trying to say, I think that you're going to like it, especially more than if you just listened to it and didn't like it on the first listen. Thank you so much for watching the review of Enter Shikari's The Spark. Don't forget to hit that like button, leave a comment below, let me know what you think of this album and of the band, and make sure you subscribe to the channel for more.